detailing out its importance. It's no small piece. So I'm not I'm not as sure that Merkel is the lynch. I mean, Germany is the linchpin, but I don't know that Merkel herself is the linchpin. In fact, I think she's been a bit of a detriment because she couldn't make a decision for so long. Uh, I question the idea of a Russian threat. That's what are they a threat about? If anything, I see Europe actually trying to bring Russia more into its orbit. The United States isn't in favor of that, but I think that Nord Stream has much bigger. It's an economic project, of course, but it's a solidification of uh, of Europe in the and as some people, especially Brzezinski and others, not the one on MSNBC, but her father who passed away, Zygmunt Brzezinski has argued that a tying together of the European and Eurasian landmass to counter Chinese growth may be the best alternative as we go forward. So I'm not buying into the old school discussion. Um, just not. I think there's other bigger issues here, especially if the United States is really, and I don't know that it's a bad thing, but is slipping in its global prestige and its power. Listen, one of the things that Trump came into power when he came into office, one of the things that I thought he actually was pretty much on target about was the end of quote unquote Pax Americana. And I think that is reaching an end because it's expensive to maintain it. And as you know, people like Graham Allison has written about with the Thucydides trap, when great, the world is dynamic and things are shifting, and when great powers start to lose their hold on the system, uh, interesting things start to play out. But do you not make way for rising spheres of influence? Or do you try to sustain the status quo? Well, if you try to sustain the status quo, you usually wind up in a very bellicose and belligerent situation, kind words for war. Uh, and I think we have to be attentive to that. But Europe is still trying to find itself. And I think that part of the German uh, uh, effort is to say, okay, you know what? We tried for a long time to do it totally our way. Again, as I argue over and over and over again, Draghi with Merkel's uh, wink and nod, or just that she was inept. We can probably look at it in several ways, but the fact that she allowed the ECB to do what it did and basically trap Germany into this situation come hell or high water, because the Germans, of course, are on the hook for all this. And if you don't believe it, then explain to me, please, Italian yields at 92 basis points, 93 basis points. There has been an implied um, use of the German credit card to sustain the European project, which is why interest rates are where they are. Because even with the ECB couldn't buy all that at the kind of levels they did without uh, the world basically saying, "Well, we know that the Germans stand behind us, and and they're the money good." Well, if that's the case, then where does this go? I would look to a further solidification of German and Russian relations, and Russia actually being a bigger part in Europe. Now, can it happen under Putin? I don't know. Putin is not a fool. He sees the
Iraq,
world as
can
it
I
is. The Russians
interrupt
certainly
you?
are not strong enough, nor will ever be big enough again to take on Chinese threat that it perceives. Um, so I think Russia really, and it's been a discussion, certainly since Ivan the Terrible, and if we want to go forward, then it's Catherine the Great and Peter the Great. So this has been an ongoing discussion, and as the United States hold up,
Great was a German.
Yeah, well, here, let's see here what David has to say for a second. I was
Yeah.
trying to chime in.
I will just give you my local perspective because my country is neighboring with Germany, and we are a manufacturing company. They own a huge amount of our country, or the German capital owns a lot of business here. Volkswagen, it's huge, yeah.
So where are you at? In Czechoslovakia?
Yeah, Czech Republic.
Okay.
Czechoslovakia.
Yes, I'm sorry. Czech Republic and
yeah.
Slovakia.
We have such a strong Russian intelligence here. You have Russian embassy and Russian politicians threatening Czech politicians of persecution. Like horrible things are happening here with Russia, and economically, Czech Republic is a German place, and now I don't think Germans are going to let this country go to the Russians. Russia is always like a hidden threat. It's not written about. It's always behind the scenes. That's to the Russian threat. And secondly, Merkel or people who will do her politics of reason and compromise and no future, they will be there only until the point people are voting for them. And the sentiment here is, I don't know a single person who is interested anymore about European Union. Everybody thinks, from low-educated people to high-educated people, from poor to rich, most of the people think this project is not working, right? So we need to think about the possibility that in Germany, something like with Brexit will happen, a huge surprise. But that will happen once somebody succeeds Merkel, and he will be not so good, he will fail or whatever, and then there could be a surprise.
David, I hear you, and believe me, I was one of the most anti-EU people you would ever meet. In fact, people didn't like my, even when I was on CNBC, they didn't like my stance. But I think that what Draghi did through the bank, it is now in so deep that if you get another Brexit from Europe, let's say, okay, we already know that Europe, many in Europe, even the French, if you go back to when the Maastricht Treaty was first rolled out in the early 1990s, the French only voted like 50.1 to 49.9. That's how close the vote was to pass Maastricht. And that's with Mitterrand, who was, very popular president, very popular. And that's all he could do. And there were other things that went to it. He had warned the French people that had they not passed and voted for Maastricht, that there was a possibility that there would be war with Germany again, in which Helmut Kohl forced him to apologize to the German people, because he basically said how warlike they were, and they basically had to corral them. Well, that's been the whole project of the EU anyway, right? From day one, from the 50s, with Jacques Delors and everybody else involved with it, which was to take French diplomacy and tie it to the German economic engine and create an alternative global force to the US, because the French were not big lovers of American power. Not whatsoever. And why Nixon ever liked de Gaulle, I never understood that friendship, but that's a long other discussion. But I think that, so look at, some member, out of the 27 could vote like the Brits or the 26 now to leave. But I think the intertwining and the cost would be so great. Look at what the Italians have been pushed through. And the Italians are the third largest economy in Europe, certainly of a far greater level of importance than the Greeks. The Greeks were, I don't mean to diminish the Greeks, but on an economic and that type of basis, very minimal. Okay, can we admit to that? Minimal. They have minimal impact, except that they could have truly destroyed the entire project through the vast amount of debt that was sitting on the books of especially German, Dutch, and French banks. So they had to salvage it. But now it's so deep, that balance sheet is so deep. If you end this, okay, there would be a financial calamity of humongous proportions that really would bring the world to a global depression. I'm convinced of that because the financial repercussions, because of the size of the ECB balance sheet, would be enormous. Because you would see yields in Italy, Spain, Portugal, do I dare say Ireland? We can go on, would jump dramatically because those countries then would have to start paying real levels of interest for the debt that they have. It would be catastrophic. And then you take all the banks that are carrying those sovereign debt instruments on the books. The capital hit would just be enormous, enormous. So, you know what? Yes, they can vote for it, but let's call it what it is. The Italians also in 2012 or 2011 under Berlusconi, who Brussels forced out, and then they brought in Mario Monti. They did the same thing in Greece with Papadopoulos. So we know that, as my friend Bernard Connolly says, there's very little demos, there's very little democracy within the EU. There's a lot of talk of democracy, but the littler nations, based on their GDP numbers and other things, they don't really get listened to. They really don't get listened to. And everybody kind of makes nice. Why? Because they threaten everybody with trade. What was everybody running around with Brexit about? Oh, the Brits are, never came to be, and it won't come to be, because the Brits will have a history of an empire, of a British Commonwealth, of relationships. They're in a much different situation. The only ones who didn't believe it, of course, was people like the FT and other mainstream media in Europe who, let's face it, are in the banks of the large financial institutions who, only want to see a united Europe in its full beauty. And I use that word very questionably. But, as they say, we've now crossed the Rubicon. It is so big. And I think that's what Merkel was pushed into understanding, because even, when, as I've maintained, when Wolfgang Schäuble pivoted on May 24th, on that weekend, it was a wake-up call as to, well, things are definitely changing. So I certainly don't diminish your thoughts. I'm just, and I believe me, I am, anybody who's known me for a long time knows the way I look at Europe. And it's been a very difficult situation. But now the money is so big because of what Draghi did that I just don't see how they're going to get out of it.
David just said the financial catastrophe you describe reminds me of the fourth turning cycle stuff.
Oh, I'm sorry, David. I haven't read it. I'm very reticent to go there. I read the book only because Steve Bannon handed it out to everybody. I pay attention to Bannon, so if it was an important enough book to him, I figured I had to read it. When Trump got elected, I read it right away. I'm not. Listen, when it comes to economic cycles, John will tell you I'm a big believer in a lot of cycles. The political cycles, yeah, you know what? You can go back and put it together, and it makes a lot of sense. Things, if you're going to push me and say, well, you know, I will say the world. I view the world through a dynamic lens, right? I mean, you're in you're in the Czech Republic. You know, I'm old enough to remember 1968 with Dubček, and everybody said, "Oh, you know," and I was only 15 years old, but being that I was always politically, I just have been reading politics and history for a long time, so I found that so fascinating, and I've read a lot of the Eastern European quote unquote Marxist economists at the time, or actually what they were called. What they tried to create socialism with a human face, which was a very Czech and Hungarian look by taking socialism and using market forces in order to create a much better, a more representative political economic entity. So, I mean, these are very important things, and there's a lot of movement here. Okay, a lot of movement. And if I was from Czechoslovakia, I would be very leery of the Russians at all times. But I don't think in today's world, the Russians do have to make a decision which way are they going. They're butting up to the Chinese, of course, because the Chinese have a lot of things the Chinese want, and the Russians are looking to stick it to the Americans a little bit. And so, you know, it almost goes back with, you know, it's the opposite of what happened in 71, 72, even though the split between China and the Soviet Union took place in 1957, but by 71, 72, Vietnam was certainly going to be wound down in some way, and the United States was looking for a major breakthrough. And so China and Russia were already at each other's throats many times. You know, they've had, like in 62 when China fought a border war with India, the Russians and the Chinese, the Soviets and the Chinese, they had their own problems. You know, back in the 50s, the Chinese were trying to colonize Siberia because the Russians needed people to mine and farm and basically exploit the natural resources of Siberia, which are vast. And Mao said, okay, well, we got people. So they turned around, all of a sudden 6 million Chinese were living in Siberia. And Stalin said, no, this ain't happening. You're out of here. And they had to send them all back. So the world, as the United States power begins to diminish, and it is, there are a lot of movements afoot that we have to pay attention to. And I hear you loud and clear. You know, the financial situation, though, due to Draghi, whatever it takes, and the fact that Merkel allowed it has created a very difficult situation. You know, it's like we can discuss, how does the Fed exit? We don't know how the Fed exits from its massive bond buying programs over the last 11 years, 12 years. That's the problem, is every time they think they have an exit plan, of course, the market throws some type of tantrum, and everybody, and the academics at the Fed get nervous and they cave in right away, right? We've seen it over and over now. So, you know, in 2016, I was at a symposium, and Jerome Powell was not yet the Fed chair. He was just a governor. And I can tell you the exact date because I remember well. It was right after Brexit. It was June 27th. It was in Chicago. And I asked him the question, who guarantees the ECB balance sheet? And he didn't even blink, and he said, they have a printing press. Didn't make me very comfortable, by the way. I tried to push it, but they wouldn't let me push. In fact, I got disinvited from a dinner afterwards where I was supposed to sit at a table with him. but I was told it was a little contentious. But they have a printing press. Well, then you see them as a unified entity, and I don't know how you unwind it. That's my point. I don't know how you break it apart, no matter how the vote takes place.
A lot of people don't like to get questioned, Ira.
No, they don't want to hear. But I will say this. I asked Carmen Reinhardt 3 months later, 4 months later, the exact same question. She gave me a long answer, and it was nothing of that sort. I was, which, I'm a big Carmen Reinhardt fan, so it didn't surprise me. But she, laid it out and took it, and I was, I felt, I said, wow, this is a total, and that's before he was chairman. So, but again, the printing press. Well, the printing press is the last bastion of a sovereign government. So I guess by that nature, by that design, the EU is a sovereign government at the end of the day. And if that's the case, I'm not going to worry about how they dissolve themselves, because I guess there will be no dissolution unless, and this is going to be ugly. I'm going to say this so, and if you do a union, a political union wrong, the United States had to fight a civil war, a very bloody civil war, to preserve the Union. And I'm quoting Lincoln. So Europe has already fought, we could say, well, I would say 3 civil wars, 1871, 1914, and 1939 to 1945. Were those not, and I could probably argue, as many other people have, many really quality historians, that that's what took place. Now they have to just put it all together. And believe me, there is nothing good. It's such a duplicitous action. And I think that's what David is saying. And I agree. It's been so duplicitous. It's been because the elites in Europe have done this without the consent of the governed. And I'm not the only one saying that. Otmar Issing a couple of years ago wrote an op-ed in the Financial Times, absolutely talking about what Draghi was doing, and the fact that the Germans were on the hook for this without ever asking the German people. There's never been a referendum in Germany about the EU, never. And that's not a small problem, by the way. But nobody ever asked the German people directly, like they did in France. Had a referendum. The Danes had several referendums. The Dutch had a referendum. People have had, but the Germans, the whole EU concept was never put to the German populace. Never. It was decided in the Bundestag. And you know what? It was because Helmut Kohl jumped so fast at his opportunity to unify Germany as his last great act, and an act of great historical significance. Don't forget, Margaret Thatcher and a few others were totally opposed to the reunification of Germany. So Kohl moved quick and made a lot of promises, and now we'll see where this goes.
Thank you, Ira.
All right, anybody else? Ira, I was looking at the quarterly chart in Swiss yen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me take a look at it. It's moving quite a bit today. Yeah, the yen, and it was interesting because after the unemployment number last night, of course, the yen went and made highs. But there's articles out about the government investment pension fund, the government pension investment fund, which has enormous amounts of U.S. treasuries earning nothing. And there are some people, and there was some noise about that the Japanese were watching the movement in the yen. And I look at it, and maybe, but I'll tell you this, the Japanese would be very hard pressed to intervene on the yen in a direct fashion. Now, the pension funds and insurance companies can buy foreign debt, but first of all, what foreign debt are you going to buy? The JGBs actually yield more than a lot, especially for Japanese investors where there's no inflation. At least the real yield is zero rather than negative. So they're concerned about it, and you can see that's why I chatted with you this morning, Judd,
Yeah.
watching the Nikkei, because I saw the Nikkei was down last night. So the Nikkei is one of the few stock markets that is actually reacting to a stronger currency in that fashion, because the Nikkei is on the path to close lower on the month, which is quite interesting, especially because when the BOJ intervenes, we know that they buy certain equities. So
Yeah, and it's below the 200-day right now. It just completely blew it apart.
yeah, so you know what? So there is noise about some type of intervention from the Ministry of Finance, because they don't have that separation. Ministry of Finance and BOJ work together. I should probably talk to the one if you didn't answer my text, see what the possibility is. But I'm not sensing it because I think the Japanese, this is not 2012 when the yen was at 75, 76 to the dollar. We're at 104, 105. And the rest of the world is in a far different situation. So they can make some noise. I'd be very, but the way the market is, the way it's trading, if it doesn't set, establish a sizable rally, especially with everything else going on, then maybe I might give some credibility to it. But right now I'm skeptical, but the market's correcting pretty well. But let me go to that Swiss yen chart, because
Yeah, I mean, I was just looking at it on a quarterly, and it's even on a weekly, it looks great, but the quarterly looks like there's something bigger brewing there.
Yeah, well, I'm looking at the weekly, as we've talked about, looks really good. I mean, it's amazing how the Swiss, even with all the intervention, they keep coming for the Swiss currency. Well, I guess it makes perfect sense, right? Because the Swiss actually do something with their intervention.
Yeah, they buy Apple.
Yeah, they had a pretty good day today.
Yeah, well, so I guess the question is, well, I think Bosco brought it up this morning about, about the Swiss,
Yeah.
and whether that was just a flight to safety, people getting out of different parts of Europe and into Switzerland and just parking money again.
You know what? But there's really not the need for it because, again, on a probability basis, and David could chime in here, after you had when Merkel forced everybody to stay and not go and walk away from this, I was adamant that she was going to get her way with Lagarde, and they did. And then I put now an existential crisis in Europe is now at 10%, where probably prior to the agreement that they hammered out was probably 40%, David. So I was definitely in your camp, a 40% probability of a breakup. But I think that after the most recent agreement, it's significantly lower, and I'd make it at 10%. So there's not as much reason to run to the Swiss. And you know what? We know what they're doing. They printed a lot of money, meaning they sold a lot of Swiss in June, July. But when you look at the Euro Swiss, it really hasn't moved that much. It's been pretty nice and calm. And actually, probably the Euro Swiss itself, well, we're making lows for the day as we talk.
That's hold on, I didn't look at that one.
It's 2.5% off the lows that it made back in March. So it's been sitting in here pretty nice and neatly. Let's see what's in on the year. Probably a little bit lower. Yeah, it's about a 0.8% lower on the year. So the Swiss really, it's no big concern for them. And the dollar is not the issue for the Swiss. It's everything emanates out of Euro Swiss, except Swiss yen is not insignificant because the Japanese and the Swiss compete on very highly engineered, high level, greatly improved, re-engineered products. You think about optics and things of that nature. They do run into each other. So it would be interesting if the Swiss were actually to start buying Nikkei and buying yen. Don't put it beyond them. Okay, that's all. I'm just raising the issue. I don't know, but if the Swiss yen got too high, I'm sure it'd be an opportunity for them to, although because Japan's such a much bigger economy, it would take a lot more effort on their part.
All right. Well, thanks.
Yeah, and what's going on in the debt, I don't know. It's the European debt markets, but they went negative. Oh, now I see that the DAX actually is now lower after trying to put on a nice performance. Don't forget it is month end, so
Yeah, and there's a lot of back and forth going on here. You have gap fills and all these high end. The only thing that really doesn't want to come in back and fill at all is Apple. You know, and Facebook really didn't give you much of a throwdown either. And now they're buying Bitcoin.
are they buying Bitcoin again?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And wait, but the other thing we haven't talked about is look what the yuan did last night.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It's strengthened big time.
Yeah. So you're probably getting some unwinding on the yuan yen. I didn't look at it, but I did notice yuan. Well, because supposedly the Chinese had such good numbers better numbers last night. So again, a lot of things afoot here, but I love that that David began this conversation because these are things that are absolutely in play that we tend to forget about. And countries like China and Russia, when the world's attention is elsewhere, that's as I've always maintained, that's when you have to watch very carefully. I see the Canadians some movement.
Yeah, Canada's still weak with well, the Canada was up, but I don't know why it's up because it was trading with the oil yesterday. Now it's just
again, I still think there's pretty good movement out of dollars, U.S. dollars. I think people are, and you can buy Canada if you're looking to diversify your interests. If you're that type of investor, it's not bad, and they're not nearly as aggressive as others as far as fiscal and monetary stimulus. So, and rates are.
This yuan yen chart, this is the first time I've looked at that in a long time. That's huge.
Let's go. Let me go.
I mean, they just took everybody out of that trade.
Yeah. You know what? And that's not an insignificant. That one has a lot of political. Yeah, and look at how the yen has appreciated. Well, listen, it held there. So, are you getting some unwinding on the last day of the month? Maybe, which is also putting some downward pressure on the yen.
Yeah, and at the end, it's basically the same chart. I mean, the yen went all the way up to, broke into support. It looks like it's just a one-day move.
Yeah, well, it is month end. Even though currencies have a settlement period, but it is month end for marking books and moving money. So why not?
Yeah.
Why not? All right, I didn't really, I only clicked on because I was listening. But, I appreciate the questions, and then we didn't get any investable ideas, but sometimes you can stay away from things. But I certainly appreciate the questions that emanated from David, and it's certainly worth, continuing the discussion about.
Well, it just gets interesting here going into, U.S. troop drawdowns and, what's going to happen over the next 4 or 5 months in Europe.
Oh yeah, well, not just because Merkel's, as David talks about, is in charge up until December 31st, but there's a lot of work to be done. If if I am going to be right in the analysis that it's just too big now to put an end to it, there was an opportunity because David, I always look at Europe, and when it comes to the euro, whose euro is it? You have to ask yourself that question. Whose euro is it? Is it Germany's euro? Or is it France and Italy's euro? Because you then get different answers to all these questions. And if back in 2013, 14, there was, I think, very good discussion that the Germans should have pulled out of the euro, gone back to the Deutschmark, and let them work out their problems. But that ship sailed, so to speak, long ago. And I believe that was part of Draghi's intentions in rushing to build that balance sheet. I mean, it's not a fact, but I just think when you look at it, that's the analysis that I came away with. Hurry up, hurry up, hurry up, because again, it makes perfect sense to do that, and again to trap the Germans. And you know what? And as I tongue in cheek say it's the scene from Bronx Tales, where the mob guys have the motorcycle guys locked in the bar, and they go, "Now you can't leave." And that's the way that I've seen Germany, because as that balance sheet has grown, now you can't leave. Now you can't leave. The impact upon the world would be, from a financial standpoint, huge and painful. So that's the parallel I draw out of there.
Okay, well, thanks. So that was really interesting, and I'm glad that you and Porter were able to connect.
Yeah, no, that was good. Yeah, I'm very impressed. Very impressed.
Yeah, that was an interesting comment he brought back too.
What's that?
Oh, did you see what he wrote back to you?
No, what did he say? No, I didn't.
Oh, the guy, the CEO, just checked out with a $250 million payday on the stock rally.
Oh, was that Porter? I did see that. Okay, yeah. I didn't realize that was Porter.
Yeah, and now Kodak is going to go to zero. It's going to come down here and fill the gap, and it's done.
Yeah. So then the media that Porter and I found commonality in deploring can then say, "Oh, we didn't tout that. We had nothing. We were just reporting."
Yeah, right.
It drove me crazy when Facebook came public, which was like one of my. Actually, I waited and bought it around at 24 and took a little heat on it for a while. For any part of the ride, but doubled my money and was happy to get out. But that day, I can tell you, I'm watching, and who was that? Kayla Tausche was chasing Zuckerberg around, and he's for days they were pushing, and so who I still use to do stocks and research for me, called me at 5 to 10 and asked me how many shares of Facebook I wanted at $40. And I said, "They're calling us to see you can get all you want?" I said, "I don't want any." I said, "That's all I need to know. If I can get what I want on an IPO, There's no chance
Well,
it's going down.
well, when Rob was head trader at that fund in California, they were on the road show and they said they wanted nothing to do with it. They saw the road show and they said, this is the biggest loser in history.
Yeah.
And it lost 50% of its value right away.
Yeah, it went down. I'm telling you, I was working out at Lifetime when it went down to 18 and a half, 19. And I saw Mark Perlin, Mike's brother, and we were talking. He says, I said, no, I'm buying it down here because I know he's going to have to monetize it. He's got to make his investors happy. Too bad I didn't stay for, much of anything. But I mean, that makes it, because they were afraid that it was just going to be a nice social network, and the hell with the investors. We know that didn't last long. And as soon as they built it out on the platform to include mobile phones, bingo, bango, and then it was just we're all in for this, and the stock performed accordingly. But I know it was the same thing when I was sitting with my daughter, who was a chef, on the morning that Blue Apron IPO'd. And I was sitting with Big Billy. We were sitting at Sarah's at breakfast, and Soph was with us. And I said, what do you think about that? She says, nah, not that way. And we were laughing. I said, so I got a call about that too. You want to buy it? I said, no. And it's been a terrible. Those investors. And again, it was touted by the mainstream financial media. Touted. They can't hide from it. They couldn't give it to you enough. Such is the way it all works.
Yeah, if they're giving it to you, that means that all their institutional investors told them to take it and put it in the drawer.
That's the famous line from Guys and Dolls with Marlon Brando, when he says to Frank Sinatra, he says, my dad told me a long time ago, he said, son, man's going to come up to you with a deck of cards and he's going to tell you that he's going to bet you that he can make that jack of diamonds jump out of the deck and spit apple cider in your ear. And sure enough, you're going to take that bet. And as soon as you take that bet, you're going to have an ear full of cider. It's like such a great line, but I'm always a skeptic first. Yeah, it may cost me opportunities, but that's right. I'm still around.
All right.
All right, I'll be listening.
All right, thanks, guys.
Right.